Welcome back, everyone. Today we have How to Become a Genius Part 2. So in the first part, we looked at what does it mean to be a genius? What does that word mean? What is the definition of it? And we compared it to other similar words like intelligence, knowledge, smart. How do those words differ and what exactly do they mean? So we get our terms right for this series. So that was kind of an introductory episode. Today, we're going to go much deeper. Today, I hope to do two things with you guys. The first is we are going to look at 15 of the greatest minds of all time, the best polymaths, the greatest geniuses, and we're going to look at what subjects did they study. And I hope to cross-reference them at the end and show you guys which subjects pop up the most and why do you want to study those subjects if you want to be a genius. And you're going to also see the pattern in which all of the greatest geniuses of all time studied multiple subjects. All of them had a certain trait, which is they were autodidact polymaths. Polymaths meaning that you study multiple subjects, autodidact meaning that you are self-taught. And then we are going to look at universities. We're going to look at the same 15 geniuses, and we're going to look at, did they attend a post-secondary education? Did they go to university? Did they go to college? Did they completely learn on their own? And you guys are going to be surprised by some of those, I think, at the end of the video. And then I'm going to conclude by answering the question, do you need to go to university to be a genius? Is it necessary? And hopefully, what subjects should you study if you want to become a genius? So we're going to do that today. And then in future parts, we might take case studies. We might look at a certain university, look at the history of the university. Maybe we'll look at a certain genius. We'll take a whole episode to break down the genius of Leonardo da Vinci. How did he study? What did he learn about? What were his motivations? We'll take a whole episode and do that. We'll take a whole episode to go through the sacrifices, because I love making these videos. They're here to be a free resource for those out there who want to become the next greatest mind of all time, which I truly believe that it could be any one of you watching this video, any one of you. This is my own self-belief, and I think this self-belief is integral to becoming a genius, but you need to believe that anybody can do anything, everybody can't do everything. That is a key thing to note. So anybody watching this video could become the next genius. However, when I go over a video like the sacrifices you'll have to make to become a genius, hopefully I'll outline the fact that most of you truly don't want this life. Most of you don't want to become a genius. You guys don't want this burden. So I hope to detail that out for you guys throughout this video and throughout subsequent videos. I'm not trying to turn you off. Like I said, I'm trying to inspire you guys to become great minds, to become the next great thing. But at the same time, I also have to be honest with you guys that this is a very, very difficult path. And there's a reason why it's one of the most looked up to things, right? The people who we look up to the most throughout history are the greatest leaders and conquerors and the greatest minds of all time, the smartest people. Those are usually the people who we look up to. So for those who are aspiring to be the greatest minds of all time, you might think you want that, but we'll see throughout this series if you really do. But let's get into it today. So let's start with, I'll go in reverse order of estimated IQ. Now, when I say estimated IQ, we are estimating what they would score on an IQ test. This is not accurate. Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, they did not take IQ tests. So please take this with a grain of salt. These are the best estimates that we have. I've looked across many, many websites to just kind of get what the general estimate is, and I've given the averages here. But don't put too much stock in this number. I'm just ranking them by IQ to give kind of a general sense of where they ranked throughout history and their accomplishments and their intellectual ability. So we'll start with the highest and we'll go down to the lowest. So in history, many of you guys probably already know this from Googling things like smartest people of all time, highest IQs of all time. The one that usually pops up at number one is, of course, Leonardo da Vinci, who lived from 1452 to 1519. His estimated IQ was between 200 and 220, which is astronomically high. The subjects in which da Vinci studied were anatomy, engineering, botany, zoology, optics, physics, music, sculpture, painting, mechanics, architecture. hydrodynamics, aerodynamics, geology, mathematics, astronomy, hydraulics, cartography, military engineering, paleontology, biology, meteorology. So that's the longest list that I'm going to read out today. Da Vinci had the widest range of interests out of any genius I've ever come across. It's quite outstanding. He must have been 99.999999999 in trade openness, because he is absolutely open to every new experience. You can tell by how many subjects he studies. Now, I'm going to wrap around to Da Vinci once I get through this entire list, but that is something to note, just how many subjects I listed off there, and that's probably not all of them. That's just an approximation of the amount of subjects this man studied throughout his life. So number 2, we'll move on to Isaac Newton, who lived from 1643 to 1727. His estimated IQ was anywhere between 190 and 200. He studied mathematics, physics, astronomy, theology, alchemy, optics, philosophy, mechanics, chemistry, history, and metaphysics. So quite a few there as well. And I want you guys to pay attention. I will list them all at the end. Once I conclude this list, I'll list in order which subjects popped up the most. But I want you guys to listen while I name each one of them and try to pay attention. Which ones do you guys hear popping up the most? Because it's important. So I'll work through this list a little bit quicker because I know this is a little bit tedious, but I really want to paint out the picture of what these geniuses studied. So the next one that I have on my list is Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who lived from 1646 to 1716. Estimated IQ between 190 and 200. He studied philosophy, mechanics, theology, logic, law, physics, linguistics, history, geology, metaphysics, politics, ethics, engineering, and diplomacy. So quite a bit there. A lot of focus on mathematics and law. And you guys will see when we wrap around to him talking about university why that is. At number 4, I have Leonhard Euler, who lived from 1707 to 1783, estimated IQ 180 to 200. He studied mathematics, physics, astronomy, engineering, logic, music theory, cartography, mechanics, optics, fluid dynamics, naval science, theology, and philosophy. Euler is one of the most underrated geniuses of all time. So I am definitely going to be doing a case study video on him at some point in the future, which I will give you guys kind of a relatively detailed biography on his life, and then we will go through kind of what he studied, why did he study those things. And we'll do them for just about every single genius on this list today, but I'll probably start with like Leibniz, Euler, the ones who are a little bit less known in the mainstream because they definitely deserve their respect. At number 5, I have Aristotle, who lived from 384 to 322 BC. Estimated IQ 180 to 200. He studied philosophy, biology, physics, logic, metaphysics, ethics, politics, rhetoric, zoology, poetics, music, psychology, astronomy, anatomy, geology, botany, and taxonomy. Jeez, there's a lot of ommies and me's today. But Aristotle, again, very, very wide in his fields of study. Some people might only know him as a philosopher, but if you actually have dove into his works of philosophy, you know that this man was quite talented. He studied a lot of things. Next up, Blaise Pascal, who lived from 1623 to 1662. He had an estimated IQ of 180 to 200. He studied mathematics, physics, theology, philosophy, logic, literature, engineering, probability theory, hydraulics, pneumatics, and medicine. René Descartes, 1596 to 1650, estimated IQ 180 to about 190. He studied philosophy, mathematics, physics, optics, metaphysics, medicine, psychology, anatomy, theology, and epidemiology. I can never say that word. I always struggle with it. Next up is Nikola Tesla, who I'm sure a lot of you guys have already heard of, 1856 to 1943. Estimated IQ from 160 to 190, probably closer to the higher end there. Physics, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, robotics, magnetism, mathematics, invention, wireless communications, metaphysics, and psychology. I don't know if invention is a field of study. I had ChatGPT kind of help me put this list together, so apologies if there's any outliers there that seem a little bit weird, but invention's somewhat I would say if there's one inventor who could say that he studied invention, it would probably be Tesla. He invented so many things. Here's a little bit of a curveball. I have William Shakespeare up next, who lived from 1564 to 1616. Estimated IQ 180 to 190. That's probably a pretty low estimate. I'd probably group him almost to 200. Shakespeare is quite a special genius. Literature, drama, poetry, history, philosophy, psychology, politics, rhetoric, theology, and linguistics, all the ones you would expect him to research. Galileo of Galilee, 1564 to 1642, 180 to 190. Physics, astronomy, engineering, mathematics, philosophy, music, mechanics, thermodynamics. He was not just an astronomer. He did a lot of other things. Galileo was one of the greatest scientists of all time. The only woman that I have on my list today, I apologize to any female viewers out there. I will explain the gender problem with IQ in a future video, but there is a reason why women do pop up a little bit less at the higher echelon of these geniuses. But there are a couple. And this next woman is smarter than 99.9% of men to ever live, and she accomplished more than basically anybody watching this video ever will. And that's not a dig on you guys. This is just to elevate Marie Curie to the status that she deserves. She lived from 1867 to 1934, estimated IQ 180 to 200, which is incredibly rare, not just for women, but for everybody. All of these people have very, very rare IQs. Hopefully that doesn't need to be said, but physics, chemistry, medicine, radioactivity, mineralogy, mathematics, crystallography. I'm going to go with that. I think she has a PhD in both chemistry and physics. She won a Nobel Prize. She's one of the greatest scientists of all time. There's a fantastic video of an arena full of scientists, brilliant men, geniuses in their own right, giving a standing ovation, a long standing ovation for Marie Curie. It's a fantastic video. She's one of my heroes too. I love Marie Curie. I look up to her quite a bit. She did some fantastic things in her career. At number 12, Benjamin Franklin. Another one. It's a little bit odd, but if you've read his biography, either his autobiography or the biography written by Walter Isaac, you know that this man is quite a genius. He lived from 1706 to 1790. Estimated IQ about 160 to 180. He studied science, physics, politics, diplomacy, philosophy, music, writing, publishing, electricity, meteorology, oceanography, economics, and inventions. There comes that inventions again. Again, another guy who invented a lot of stuff and did some crazy experiments. From experimenting with electricity to experimenting with dead bodies. This guy, he was very interested in the world, and I can't wait to do a case study on Benjamin Franklin because he's an eccentric genius, and he's quite interesting to read about and definitely will be to talk about. Next up, we have at number 13, Roger Bacon, who lived from 1219 to 1292. Estimated IQ 160 to 175. He studied philosophy, theology, optics, alchemy, astronomy, mathematics, linguistics, logic, medicine, pharmacology, and experimental science. He's another underrated genius that I will definitely be doing a case study for. At 14, I have Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. I love saying that name. 1749 to 1832. Literature, poetry, botany, mineralogy, philosophy, color theory, physics, and anatomy. Goethe wrote my favorite play of all time, Faust. I put Faust above anything Shakespeare's ever written, and I'm a big Shakespeare fan. I love King Lear, I love Macbeth, but for some reason, Faust to me is the play that speaks to my soul. And Goethe, his poetry aside, he was a brilliant scientist. So the last one that I'll talk about today, I know this is a bit of a tedious list to go over, but Michelangelo from 1475 to 1564, IQ of about 150 to 160, which is almost insulting, I think. I would estimate his IQ to be higher. Maybe it's because he was a little bit more limited in his range of focus. Sculpture, painting, architecture, poetry, anatomy, engineering, and military design. He was a little bit more focused on the arts, but I think we could probably give him the moniker of the greatest artist to ever live. I think the Sistine Chapel is probably the greatest piece of art ever made, especially when you look into the history of it, how it was painted. the inspirations behind it. He might be the greatest artist of all time. If I had to pick, if aliens came down from Earth and they said, who's your pick for the greatest artist to ever live in human history, I'd probably have to offer up Michelangelo, because probably the best sculptor we've ever seen, maybe the best painter we've ever seen. That's a very subjective term, the best painter ever. But yeah, we'll wrap up there. So hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of an understanding of just how diverse these thinkers were in their thinking, how many different subjects they actually got into. So what were the most commonly reoccurring subjects on that list? Well, I don't think it's surprising to anybody that the first one is philosophy, which is just the study of knowledge, how to know. It's learning how to learn almost. Philosophy is always going to be number one. It's in some ways the easiest subject to study, because basically anybody could pick up, some of the more easier works of philosophy, I think. But to really dive into it, to go through Kant and Hegel and Schopenhauer, it's work. I'm not going to say it's as difficult as going through the most difficult works of mathematics and physics, which we'll talk about here in a second, because those are the next two categories that came up the most. But philosophy definitely takes a lot of mental power to work through, especially putting the ideas together, understanding the concepts. Many people read philosophy. Very few people fully understand it, deeply understand it, and even fewer people are able to live out the lessons that they actually learn from philosophy. So philosophy, I could talk about it all day, but it's no surprise that it's number one. It's the number one subject you should be studying. I think that back in the 1800s, I think for Oxford, the first year students, whether you were in the STEM fields or you were studying the classics and the humanities, either or, your first year was basically spent studying classical literature, the greatest historians of all time and the greatest philosophers of all time, and the greatest literature, of course. But it's interesting to me that Oxford put such emphasis on that. Even the people in the STEM fields were forced to learn about philosophy because it's so important. Now, eventually they reversed that. They created a different first-year program for the STEM field students, but I remember reading that and going yeah, philosophy is one of those subjects that I think is at the very base of knowledge. So definitely make sure you're studying philosophy if you want to be a genius. The next two, number 2 is mathematics, number 3 is physics. They are quite commonly referred to as the two most difficult sciences to study. They are I would agree with that. I study both, but not very well. They are difficult, but mathematics and physics are absolutely imperative for understanding the world. Mathematics is the language of reality, and physics is how everything works. Astronomy is also very important. That's at number 4. Biology and anatomy is at 5. How does the body work? How do human beings work? How do animals work? What's the difference between us? All of the mechanisms of biology and anatomy. Politics and law, very important to know. This kind of derives from philosophy, right? If you study law, you're really a philosophy student, but you're learning the practical aspects of it. It's the same with medicine. You're really a biology student, but you're studying the practical aspects of biology, which is medicine. So politics and law, you don't want to overlook them. It's something that I overlooked for many, many years. I would only study philosophy, and then I realized, I need to actually study law, because this is when the philosophy comes into reality and gets put into play. So art at number 7. At number 8, we have engineering and mechanics. At number 9, music theory. And at number 10, theology, which is close to philosophy. They overlap sometimes. But yeah, music theory, that's a more interesting one. I don't know if I'm ready to talk about that one yet. I study music. I'm not a classically trained musician or anything like that, but I do go out of my way to really push myself to listen to things that are challenging. And music theory is very interesting. I'll have a whole episode on why geniuses study and partake in music, because a lot of the greatest minds of all time are classically trained musicians, which is really weird. I'm not going to say that this is I don't know what the statistics for this are, but I think if you met a doctor, the odds that they are a classically trained musician are a lot higher than if you met a plumber or a construction worker, right? So usually if you're a little bit more gifted in IQ, you're a little bit more educated, you spend a little bit more time learning the theory of music. So I'm going to stop there with the subjects. We're going to move on to the universities. So let's take a look at where all of these geniuses received their education. So I'm going to go through the list in the exact same order. I'll start with Da Vinci, work my way down through the same thinkers, and we'll take a look at where all of them studied. I'm not going to restate when they lived. That'd be redundant. But starting with Da Vinci, he was largely self-taught, which is very inspirational because he arguably achieved the most out of anybody on this list. It's a debate, obviously, but Da Vinci has the highest estimated IQ of anybody on this list. I think most people would agree that he was the most intellectually talented out of anybody on this list. So that does give him, a boost. That does give him something that the rest of us probably don't have. But, he had a informal apprenticeship in Florence under the artist Andrea del Verrocchio. I'm butchering that name. I'm sorry, my Italian viewers, where he learned painting, sculpture, and mechanics. His studies in anatomy, engineering, and various sciences were largely self-directed. So he had a little bit of an apprenticeship there. It's hard to get anywhere in life without some sort of mentor, some sort of, somebody to look up to and model yourself after. Luckily, we have YouTube, so there's plenty of brilliant thinkers you can model yourself after here on YouTube, or you can read books. You don't have to have somebody directly in your life to give you that guidance, but it definitely helps. Isaac Newton is the next one on my list, and he went to the University of Cambridge, where he initially studied a traditional curriculum, but soon pursued self-study in mathematics and physics. Cambridge was foundational, but much of his groundbreaking work was done independently during the plague years when the university was closed. So this is another thing with Newton. Now, I gotta be careful in how I phrase this because I don't want people to be loser loners who spend all their time in their room and play video games all day. Definitely don't be playing video games all day. Do something productive. But Newton was kind of like that. He was a little bit of a loner, pretty reclusive. He spent a lot of time in his room. And I was like that growing up too. I didn't go to a lot of parties, not a lot of social events. I kind of saw it as a waste of time. So I'd spend a lot of time in my room watching movies, reading books, studying, listening to music, just trying to engage with art and science and immerse myself in that. That's all I ever wanted to do growing up. I was always very, very curious, very passionate about learning, and I kind of felt that. I kind of felt like society would look at me like, why are you such a loser? Like, why do you spend all your time in your room? Like, come out and socialize. It's like, yeah, I would if people were more interesting, but I totally get it, man. Like, Isaac Newton was a little bit reclusive like that, and he did a lot of his work, from the shell of his own room, his own home. So never feel bad about that. But like I said, don't close yourself off completely from society. You need human interaction to survive. And Newton, University of Cambridge, but also largely self-taught. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz went to the University of Leipzig and the University of Altdorf. Jesus, I'm butchering some names today. Leibniz attended the University of Leipzig studying law and philosophy and completed his doctorate in law at the University of Altdorf. His mathematical and scientific knowledge, however, was largely self-taught and developed independently. So this is very interesting because if you bring up the name Leibniz, most people associate it with math and his work in mathematics, but that's not what he went to school for. He went to school for law. So that's interesting. So you'll see that sometimes it can benefit you to go to university to study something just to get the university perspective, just to have access to the resources and archives. I'll talk a little bit about this more at the end and the pros and cons of university and why you might want to go. But somebody like Leibniz somebody like Leibniz would go to the university, study something that they're not that he wasn't passionate in law and philosophy. He also wrote on those subjects, but study something that's not like his main thing that he's known for, just to get, a more fleshed out education, a more fleshed out knowledge of the world, which his studies in law and philosophy definitely influenced his study in mathematics. And you can see that when you read his works. And he is, like I said, he's a genius that I'll make a whole video on because I think he's a little bit overlooked. He doesn't have a household name like Newton or Da Vinci, but he's right up there with them. Leonhard Euler went to the University of Basel. Euler studied at the University of Basel, focusing on philosophy, logic, and mathematics. He was mentored by Johann Bernoulli, a leading mathematician, which profoundly influenced his mathematical pursuits. So Euler, known for mathematics, went to one of the top mathematics universities and was taught by one of the greatest mathematical professors of the day, maybe of all time. So Euler definitely benefited from the university system. He benefited from a traditional, formal education, and that is just clear. So there's really nothing to say about that. Although Euler had the autodidact polymath quality within him, he also taught himself subjects that he wasn't learning in school, which is what you're going to see with everybody that I mentioned on this list today. Whether they went to university or not, they are all autodidact. They all teach themselves. So you can go to university, you can get 5 different degrees. That's not enough. You still need to be teaching yourself other subjects. Hopefully that makes sense. But you're going to see that pattern pop up quite a bit here. Aristotle attended Plato's Academy in Athens, obviously not a formal university as we know them today, but still he went and he learned from Plato. So, yeah, and Plato learned from Socrates. So the line there is pretty good. That's like the number one person you'd want to be in like all of history is Aristotle. To learn from Plato, who learned from Socrates, it's like that's a pretty good line to be in. But Aristotle studied at Plato's Academy in Athens for 20 years. This formal education grounded him in philosophy, biology, and logic, but his later works, particularly in empirical studies, was largely self-directed. So again, he spent 20 years learning under Plato and then goes on and learns even more. It's the autodidact polymath quality, the never-ending pursuit, the always wanting to learn more. There's always more to learn. You can get a PhD in physics, but then there's still math. You got to get a PhD in math. And then, well, there's still chemistry. There's still so much I don't know about chemistry. So you got to get a PhD in chemistry. The thing is you can't get 50 PhDs. It's just impossible. There's just not enough time in the world. You got to commit yourself to programs. And this is why you see this pattern of, sometimes they'll pursue their PhDs, maybe multiple PhDs, but then they also have to teach themselves the whatever else they want to learn or whatever else they need to learn, because there's just not enough time in the world to get PhDs in every single subject. There are things called perennial students who actually have made it their life effort to spend 50, 60 years just in school the whole time, and even those people have only racked up I think the most is like 13 or 14 PhDs. Some guy in England, I believe. There's some claims of people in India with 100 PhDs, but I don't know how accurate those claims are. Moving on, number 6, we have Blaise Pascal, who was largely self-taught. Blaise Pascal's father, who had a deep interest in mathematics, educated him at home. Pascal's developed his theories in mathematics, physics, and philosophy largely on his own, but it would help to have a dad who was into mathematics. I wish I had that. My dad was obsessed with motocross riding and hockey, so that's kind of what I was put into, riding dirt bikes and playing hockey. It was kind of my own inner journey to go, I'm more of an intellectual. I like studying. I like books. I like watching art house films and stuff like that. That's my personality. That's who I am. But my father kind of pushed me into hockey, and I got really good at hockey. I was one of the best players in the country at one point, which is saying a lot because I live in Canada. But if I had a father like Pascal's, who was obsessed with math, which is rare, math is a very difficult subject. So I'm sure most of you guys watching, your fathers aren't obsessive about math. It's probably something else. But if you have somebody like that at home that can foster that love and that passion for learning, it's huge. It's huge. I wish I had that more from my father. He pushed me more into athletics. But I did get it from my mom. My mom read a lot of books growing up. Not great books, I would say. A lot of chicken noodle soup books and stuff like that. But she did kind of garnish that love for reading for me. And that just grew and grew and grew. And now I read more than her, which is surprising to me. If you told me that at 15, I'd be there's no way I'd read more than my mom. And now I read more than her. So it all comes full circle, right? René Descartes, University of Poitiers. Descartes attended University of Poitiers, earning a law degree. However, he largely abandoned his formal education in favor of self-study, traveling and developing his own ideas in mathematics, philosophy, and science. So again, Descartes, too big for school. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes these great minds, they can't be captured by the same curriculums that would capture the average student, I guess. When you have an IQ, when you have a machine that just works a little bit better, a little bit faster than everybody else's, it's sometimes hard to sit down and learn about a subject for 6 months or a year that would take you less than a month or a couple weeks to learn about if you were learning about it on your own. So that can be very, very frustrating. And that's why a lot of very smart people drop out of universities. Now, not everybody that drops out of university is smart. In fact, most of them are probably not smart. Most of them probably can't get through university. It's too difficult for them. That's why they're dropping out. I'd say it's probably the minority of people who drop out from university who are too smart for university. But certainly it happens. It seems to have happened with Rene Descartes. I think he wanted to get the formal education like a lot of us. We're kind of pressured into it, especially if you're from a more affluent family. You're kind of pressured into getting that post-secondary education. And then you get there and you're like, well, this isn't what I thought it would be. That certainly was my case, but I live in Canada in the 2020s is a little bit different from when Descartes was growing up. But I dropped out of university for different reasons, more political reasons, if anything. But Descartes, I feel like he was just too big for school. He had to go out and learn on his own. And you can certainly learn a lot more through traveling, talking to people, if you have the passion to learn on your own. I think that is one lesson that we're getting here from going through this list. Nikola Tesla went to Graz University of Technology, did not complete. So Tesla attended Graz University of Technology in Austria, where he studied engineering and physics. He did not complete his degree, leaving after his second year, and much of his later work was self-directed. So again, I'm not trying to bolster you guys up to drop out of university here. That's not the goal. Most of you guys, if you're in university right now, should probably stay in university. But somebody like Tesla, again, a little bit too big for school. He didn't even complete his education. Descartes looks like he actually got his degree in law. Tesla, I'm done. I'm leaving after the second year. Similar to me, I left after my first year of psychology. It was a little bit too politically bent, and I was not learning anything. I mean, the curriculum sucked. I was learning way more from lectures that I was watching on my bus ride to university than I was at the lectures that I was paying for at the university. So I eventually dropped out. I'm like, I can actually teach this stuff to myself on my own. I don't want to gouge myself. University prices right now are insane compared to what you get. And I didn't really feel like I wanted the piece of paper. It's not what I'm there for. I'm there to learn. So for me, I dropped out after a year. And I kind of related to Tesla in that way. That it was somebody who I looked to. I was like, well, you know what? Tesla dropped out of university, so I'm going to too. Now, again, do not follow this logic. It's dumb. I'm not claiming that I'm the next Tesla or that I have the same genius as Tesla. But he was somebody who I looked to as feeling a little bit better for my decision. Because, you think of university dropout, you think of somebody who's dumb or lazy or who just didn't want to get things done. But sometimes people drop out of university because there is legitimately a better path for them. Now, I would like to think that for me, it's this YouTube channel. I think making videos like this for you guys for free, engaging in what I want to engage with intellectually and making fun videos. I think this is more for me. This is what I feel like I'm meant to do. So that's why I dropped out. And obviously Tesla dropped out because he wanted to invent electricity. Not literally. He didn't literally invent electricity. It's an exaggerated term to kind of show just how much he did in that field. But moving on, we have William Shakespeare, who was self-taught. As many of you may already know, Shakespeare was self-taught with no record of formal higher education. His deep knowledge of history, philosophy, and human psychology came from personal study, likely through reading, observation, and life experience. So Shakespeare is a perfect example of that. You read his plays, and you get this profound depth, this profound understanding of humanity, of human psychology and history as well, right? There's so many historical plays by Shakespeare. And then you read a fact like that was largely self-taught. And that's very inspiring because I spend a lot of time observing people. I love people watching. It's one of my favorite pastimes or hobbies. I love reading psychology. I read it relentlessly. I read philosophy relentlessly. I read history so much. That's probably my most studied subject. I read so much history. So for me, it's inspiring that I'm kind of on the same course. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to write the next works of Shakespeare. I don't think anybody can. I think that's kind of a one and done thing. Shakespeare came and he went, and now everybody else is just going to be riffing off of him, which is basically how it's gone. But it gives you kind of some inspiration there that, what he studied is available. Like, it's available. Like, what Shakespeare studied from is available to you. You have access to the same resources. And you, in theory, could write something as great as Shakespeare. Now, are you going to write, 30 amazing plays that are on the same level as Shakespeare? Probably not, but I'm not doubting you. I think you can do it. I'm certainly sure that you're capable of creating at least one play as great as Shakespeare if you put your mind to it. So yeah, Shakespeare, completely self-taught, and an absolute genius at that. Galileo of Galilee went to the University of Pisa, but did not complete. So Galileo enrolled at the University of Pisa to study medicine, but later shifted his interest to mathematics and physics. He left without completing a degree, instead pursuing self-directed studies in physics and astronomy. So again, another guy who dropped out of university because he wasn't enjoying his studies, he wasn't learning as much as maybe he wanted to. Again, I have the feeling here, I don't know Galileo personally. The guy lived, 500 years ago, but I imagine if I met him, the conversation would probably go like, I went to university to kind of get the prestige and the esteem of a higher education, wasn't learning as rapidly as I was on my own, so I decided to pursue my own studies, and they were proving pretty well. They were proving to show something, and obviously they did, because we're talking about him now. We wouldn't be talking about a man from 500 years ago if he didn't accomplish something remarkable. Marie Curie went to the University of Paris. Curie attended the University of Paris, where she earned degrees in physics and mathematics. That's what it was. Her advanced scientific research was conducted in both academic and independent settings, where she contributed extensively to the study of radioactivity. So Marie Curie is somebody who was traditionally educated, formal education, and definitely benefited from it. Like I said there, I think she had a PhD in mathematics and physics. It's either that or it's physics and chemistry. I'm blanking right now, but I'll throw it up on screen just to give you guys the legitimate facts there. But Benjamin Franklin is up next, and no surprise there that eccentric Benjamin Franklin was largely self-taught. Franklin was self-taught with little formal schooling beyond elementary education. He educated himself through reading and experimenting in various fields, from science and philosophy to politics and economics. So Benjamin Franklin is a very, very inspiring person to read about as well. He was like pretty much completely self-taught, and just somebody who was fascinated by the world in every single way. I mean, he was, like I said before, experimenting with electricity and kites and cutting open people's bodies and stuff. He was doing everything. He was trying to learn absolutely everything about the world, and he was a brilliant genius, absolutely brilliant. Roger Bacon, University of Oxford, possibly University of Paris. So Bacon studied at the University of Oxford, where he was introduced to Aristotle's works, and may have also studied at the University of Paris. His studies in natural philosophy and alchemy, however, were largely self-directed. So this would have been a little bit over 100 years after the founding of Oxford University. I believe it was founded in 1096. I believe that was the year. And the University of Paris was sometime in the 1100s. So these universities were very, very new at the time of Roger Bacon. And very interesting. I can't wait to do a video on him, because he lived from 1219 to 1292. And that's like a time period when most people have no sense of what happened in that time period. If you ask most people on the street, name me somebody from the 13th century, they're going to blank. They're not going to be able to name anybody. So it's one of those time periods that's not sketched out very well. So I hope to do that in my video when I break his life down a little bit more. We have Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who went to the University of Leipzig and the University of Strasbourg. Goethe studied law at the University of Leipzig and later completed his degree at the University of Strasbourg. His interests in botany, anatomy, and color theory were largely self-developed through independent study and observation. And lastly, Michelangelo, who was self-taught. He was primarily self-taught, although he had an apprenticeship with the painter Domenico Ghirlandaio in Florence. Oh my God, you Italians. You had too many letters in your names. His mastery of anatomy and engineering and architecture was achieved through self-study and personal experimentation. So yeah, let's break down who was university educated and who wasn't. So self-taught, we have Leonardo da Vinci, Blaise Pascal, William Shakespeare, Nikola Tesla, partially, right? He dropped out. Benjamin Franklin, Roger Bacon, partially, again. Johann von Goethe, self-taught in the scientific fields, and Michelangelo. And for university studied people, we have Isaac Newton, who we said University of Cambridge, but like I said, also did most of his work on his own in his room. We have Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who went to Leipzig University. Euler, who benefited a lot from the University of Basel. Aristotle, obviously learning from Plato. Let's see, I wish I was able to learn directly from Plato. My God. René Descartes, University of Poitiers. And we have Marie Curie, University of Paris. Galileo, the University of Pisa. So the numbers there are pretty much split, which is kind of inspiring, I think. I think, you can do it with the university route, and you can do it with no university at all. You can do it completely self-taught with no formal secondary education. So I don't think university is absolutely necessary to becoming a great genius, to becoming a, era-defining polymath. I think you can do it on your own. Now, I will eventually do a full part discussing the pros and cons of university, but I'm going to get into it a little bit today. So, university has obviously pros and cons. Getting into top universities is very difficult. Often it takes a lot of money. You have to have some influence, some family connections. The average person, even if you have really, really good grades, the odds of you getting into Harvard are a little bit low. There's also some affirmative action I won't talk about today because that's kind of come and now it's starting to go a little bit. But buying your way into university is definitely a thing. There's definitely a lot of people that are in university because their families are wealthy or because their families have connections, and universities are far away, right? Like Oxford University, Cambridge University, 2 universities I would love to study at are quite a ways away from me. They're across the pond, and I would have to move over there to study there. So there's that problem as well, is the travel and even getting in. But let's say you do get into university. Well, what are the cons there? Well, like I said before, you might be tied down to a structure that's slow for you. You might be learning things at a pace that aren't perfect for you. You might be in a class that's too big. Like for me, I was in a psychology class that was in an auditorium with 100 people, and it was not personal at all. I didn't feel like I could ask the teacher any questions. It wasn't a good environment for learning psychology. So there might be something like that where the environment's not perfect for you to actually optimally learn about the subject. You might actually have a better way of learning about it on your own, just sitting in a library, opening up books on your own, or diving into archives in your own time. But there's certainly things that you can't do outside of university. Like you can do experiments, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's some legal boundaries on the experiments that you can and can't do. You can't do the same experiments Benjamin Franklin was doing. Probably go to jail for that, but you can do experiments on your own, obviously. I've done that. I've done psychology experiments with my friends and family. I've created questionnaires and given it to them and taken them back and analyzed the data, and I found some interesting conclusions through that. So that's an example of me doing experiments on my own. But there's a lot of experiments that you can't do. Like if you want to work on a human body, if you want to learn about anatomy, you kind of have to go to medical school. That's the only place where you're going to be able to cut somebody open, like legally. So not just that, but like astronomy. If you want access to the top telescopes, like sure, you can go build yourself a telescope like Galileo did, but you're not going to have a telescope like a fraction of the power of the top telescopes that we have today, and you need those top telescopes that we have today to make any sort of new advancement in the field. So it's just unfortunate that some of these sciences have pushed so far that they now have technologies that you kind of need to be embedded in university or in the profession to actually use those tools that you need to further the science any further. Hopefully that makes some sense. But it's the same with chemistry, right? Like where are you going to get the chemicals to do chemical experiments? Like you can find some stuff on your own. If you live in the wilderness, maybe you have access to some plants, you can do some botany experiments. But for chemistry, like there's going to be chemicals that you're going to want to work with that you don't have access to unless you're at a university or at an institution where they have access to all that stuff. So There's plenty of sciences that are like that. That's mostly STEM fields. When it comes to humanities, a lot of that stuff you can actually find on your own. There are some textbooks, like a lot of Cambridge textbooks, Oxford textbooks. Some of the best history books ever written are kind of only found at those top universities. It's either that or they're very, very expensive to buy on your own. But there is a lot of history and a lot of literature out there that kind of make up the complete base of a humanities degree that's just completely free to you guys. Well, not free. You got to go buy books on Amazon, but you can search things up on Internet Archive. You can find audiobooks. Like there's ways around it. You can actually learn about literature, philosophy, theology, history, a lot of these subjects, poetry. You can learn about them in great detail on your own because all of the resources are right there. You don't need a stethoscope to study poetry. You don't need a telescope to figure out what the greatest historian is or to read the greatest historians, right? So there's that. There's the technology aspect and the access to resources. There's also access to peers. So you want to be surrounded by people who are smart. You want to be surrounded by people who are thinking the same things as you or similar things as you because they keep you in check. If you don't have people around you that are as smart as you or close to your intelligence or more smart than you, then you have nobody checking you on what you get wrong. And you want that to happen. You constantly want people checking you on what you're getting wrong, what you're misunderstanding. So that's a big part of university is just having peers around you that kind of keep you, they're like bumpers on the bowling alley lane, right? They keep you from going into the gutter, which you can do if you self-study. You could spiral out. You can become like a Terrence Howard. You can become a Graham Hancock. You know, you can spiral out and get into a pseudoscience really quickly and think that that's real. And if you don't have people in the field checking you constantly, you can do bad science a lot of the time. There have been a lot of very, very smart people with high IQs who have dropped out of university or who never sign up to go and who teach themselves on their own and come up with theories that are just absolutely rubbish. They are easily debunked. They're not based on anything. And it's very sad to see because those people, if they got a formal education, could have been amazing minds. They could have been great thinkers if they went through the process of learning things the right way. So there is that too. You want people there to check you. You want professors and peers to check you. Now, having access to professors is another thing. If you go to a top university, which, not everybody gets into a top university, but if you do, you sometimes have access to the world-leading experts in those fields. The top scientists in the world oftentimes teach. They are oftentimes professors at these top universities. So, you can go to Cambridge University and you can learn from a historian who actually has done like the majority of the research on that specific subject. And he's the one who's finding out the new stuff. So you actually want to learn from him, if anybody. And you'd be learning from him either way if you were in university or not, because that's the guy to look to. But if you get to directly interact with him every day, that's a huge benefit. So having access to high-level professors is also huge. What else is there with university? Well, libraries, right? Archives. Archives are different than libraries. They're like the primary sources, the manuscripts, the fragments. You want to study that stuff because that's the real stuff. Then you get the books that are based off of it. You might read a history book and think, oh, I have a sense of this era in history, but you don't. You have a sense of what that historian has a sense of that period of history, right? You're getting his kind of biased manufacturing of what that story is. Now, it might be a really good history book. There are fantastic history books out there. And there are some history books that are more biased. And you got to read a lot of history books to get a sense of a period in history. The best way to do it is to go directly to the source, to read the archives, to read, if you want to learn about World War II, read letters, read interactions between the presidents and the world leaders. You want to read, you want to get as close to the source as possible, especially with history. You want to interview people. So all of this stuff you're going to have much more access to it if you're at a university. Like, I don't have access to archives that are, in the US or in England. I don't have access to them. I have to Google what I can online. I look through Internet Archive. If I can't find it, if it's behind a paywall, or if you have to go to that place in particular and see it in person, then I'm out of luck. That's kind of where my knowledge ends. I can't go farther than that. Now, maybe one day I'll have the influence where I can walk into any archive and get my hands on what I want to get my hands on. But as far as it goes right now, I'm not in a university where I can actually access these archives. So archives is a huge thing. Libraries, I have a personal library. One day I'll do a tour of it. I'm closing in on 600 books, which I'm really proud of. Took me quite a few years to get up to 600 books. I'm like really proud of my library. I have a lot of the great classics, and I have the greatest novels of all time. I have most of the great history of all time. I have my favorite comic books. I have what I need, but that library is a fraction of what my local library is, and that's a fraction of what a university library would be. My local library has way more books than I do. Most of them I don't really find useful. Most books suck. It's the same thing with everything. Most music sucks. Most movies suck. Most books suck. So when you go to a local library like that, most of the books are going to suck. But when you go to a university library, it's curated. It's curated by the greatest minds of all time because they all aggregate to the universities and they create these libraries that I wish I had access to. I mean, I'd switch my library with the University of Cambridge's library in an instant. I don't have room for it. I'd be sleeping on books if I did that. But I would love to have access to a library like that. So there's that. There's the history of the buildings, which is very inspiring. It keeps you wanting to learn. When you're learning in a building, like some of the colleges of Oxford, some of them go back hundreds of years, and you're in buildings where like historical figures have walked through and studied in, and the greatest minds of all time have sat in the same chairs that you're sitting in. It's very inspirational, and it keeps you wanting to learn. So all of this stuff. I mean, I love, learning from the comfort of my own home and in my bedroom and sitting and watching my own TV. But if I could walk into Oxford University every day or Cambridge University every day and immerse myself in that history, I would much rather have that. So there's all of these aspects of university that you can't get through self-teaching yourself. But there's a lot of aspects of self-teaching that you can't get at university. You can learn a lot faster on your own. Like I've been able to crank through what would be probably a coursework for a bachelor's degree in history in like a year. I've been able to shrink that down because I go, okay, well, what are they reading? Well, let me read all of that faster because I don't have other courses. I don't have other things in life. All I want to do is read history. So I'm able to condense some of the learning down. Now I can't squeeze a PhD degree down into something small because, like I said, when you get into those PhD master's degrees, now you're getting into, experiments and lab work and stuff that I can't do. Archaeology studies and going on location, all that stuff I can't do. So I can collapse what basically a bachelor's degree would be in like history or philosophy or theology down into a shorter fraction of, or a shorter amount of time because I can hyper concentrate my studies. I can just read faster. In school, they might say, well, we want you to read this book by the end of the month. But I might be able to read that book in a week. And then if I read that book in a week, then I have 3 more weeks. I have room for 3 more books. So if you're teaching yourself, you can progress through things quicker, but you just want to be aware of what you're missing out with university. Like I said, very, very pricey. Most people can't afford it. The top universities, very hard to get into. You kind of have to have some sort of connection or just ridiculously high grades. And most people, prior to the age of 18, they don't care as much about their grades as they should. You hit 25, 26, and you start looking back and you go, damn, I should have focused more, right? So there's a lot of people like that are very smart, but they just didn't put the effort in high school, and now they can't get into those universities. They'd have to go back and retake high school courses, and a lot of people don't want to do that. I wouldn't want to do that. So just know what you're missing out with, and the pros and cons of each. Again, I'll detail this out more in a future part, but I just hope that today I was able to show you guys kind of what subjects do the greatest minds of all time study. Hopefully you guys got a sense of that. Philosophy, mathematics, optics comes up a lot. The study of the eye, how we see things. It's our strongest sense. If you could only have one sense to detect predators, we would all choose vision. It's the best sense that we have. You can see things faster than you can hear things. A whole bunch of reasons why vision is the most powerful and important sense. So a lot of the greatest minds of all time have studied optics and just how the eye works. But all these subjects, I hope I kind of painted out a picture there for you guys of what you guys should get into. And if you find something that's not interesting to you, you might have to force yourself to get into it. I'll conclude on this point here. There's oftentimes, even with art, where I engage with a piece of art that is impenetrable. It's difficult. It's not accessible. I can't understand it, and it's hard. You might look at biology and you might go, I don't I don't really get that. I don't have like a natural interest for it. Like to me, it's not interesting to study. So you might have to force yourself to study it. So with music, I came across this band called Death Grips a while ago, about 10 years ago now. And at first I couldn't listen to any of their music. It was so abrasive, so distorted and out there, and I'd never heard anything like it. It just sounded like noise to me. It sounded like garbage. And then I kept listening to it. Because I heard so many people speak so highly of it, that it was genius music, that there was real depth there. And I'm like, I can't hear it. I need to keep listening. And then eventually it started to click. And soon one song grabbed me and it became one of my favorite songs. And then another song grabbed me. And then soon I liked a whole album. And then soon I liked all of their works. And then soon I was telling everybody, this is the most genius band of all time. They're way more creative than the Beatles. Like they blow away everybody. Like this is music. And people I'm showing it to are like, what is this? It's hard. It's abrasive. I don't get it. They were where I was when I first engaged with it, right? But over time, it started to click for me. And Death Grips is a weird example. I only bring that up because I know some people are going to go search it up after this. And yeah, you'll be like, what the heck? How does he enjoy this music? I have like all of their albums on vinyl at this point. I absolutely love them. I like unironically like their music. It just took time. I could use a better example. I could use Bach, right? Bach for me took a long time to understand. It wasn't like Beethoven where I was whisked away immediately and I understood it from the get-go. Bach took a while for me to get, but eventually I got it. It clicked for me and I'm like, oh, Bach really is the greatest musician of all time. He literally is better than Beethoven, Mozart, anybody. Like Bach is the GOAT. And that only clicked for me after engaging with it and forcing myself to engage with it multiple times. And it's the same thing for sciences. If biology doesn't speak to you, watch some videos to get you interested. Read the most popular biology book or the most accessible one or the most exciting one. You can search this up, like go on Google, most exciting biology book, and just read that. Like start to get in there and it'll start to grab you. It'll start to grip you. I think that's why Death Grips is called Death Grips, because it slowly grips you and then it has a stranglehold on you and you can not listen to anything else. But yeah, if you slowly start to push yourself into these subjects, you'll find that you actually can study them. Just because you're not interested in something immediately doesn't mean that you can't grow an interest for it over time. It's the same thing with, developing your palate. If you've ever taken culinary or anything like that, you've heard this term before of developing a palate. You want to taste different foods and you want to focus on what is the taste, keep it in your mouth, savor it. And you do this over time and you start to develop a palate. You start to be able to taste different things. You can taste a meal and you could tell it like, oh yeah, there's onion in here and there's this kind of pepper in here. I could taste some oregano. Like you start to develop that. And then you start to develop a taste for wider and wider ranges of food. And then now you can eat anything. Like some people are picky eaters, but that's just the state that you're in right now. You can grow that out. You can, okay, I'm a picky eater. I don't like eating this. I hate eating this. Okay, I'm going to start with what I don't like first. And then maybe one day I can get up to what I hate. And then maybe eventually I can just eat everything. Like for me, if it's cooked well, I'll eat it. But that took a while for me to work up to that. And when I was young, I was like, no carrots, no asparagus, keep that off my plate. Eventually my parents are like, well, let's add a little bit of spice to it. Try it again. Okay, I kind of like it, right? So some things just take time. They take time to get interested in. Don't think because that you're not interested in something right away that you can't become interested in it over time. And something that you might hate initially might become your favorite thing later on in life. There's plenty of films that I watched. Inland Empire is a great example from David Lynch, R.I.P. He just passed away, one of my favorite directors of all time. He had a film called Inland Empire, which is impenetrable. It's an anti-movie. It's literally an anti-movie. It's meant to not make sense. And you watch it and it's 3 hours of what the heck am I watching? It's horrifying. It gets under your skin. And the first time I watched it, I hated it. The second time I watched it, it became my favorite film of all time. Now, I don't know if it's number 1 anymore, but it's still in my top 10. It's still like really high up there for me because the second time I watched it, I got it. I gave it another chance. So it's the same thing with studying these subjects. Like give them a chance, really like put an effort in, because you might think like, oh man, I'm never going to be a genius. I'm only interested in philosophy, mathematics, physics, biology. Those all, they don't seem interesting to me at all. Like give it some time, pick away at it, I promise you, through watching these videos, through reading books, you'll eventually pick up on it. And I'm sure it'll all become interesting to you eventually. Everything's interesting. Every single subject is literally interesting to its deepest level. It just takes time to come around to them. And then with universities, I think I said enough on them already that, it's 50-50 with the list that I went over between who went, who finished, and who actually benefited from a formal education. You don't need it. It's not absolutely necessary. A lot of the people I covered today were from hundreds of years ago, so that is also something to factor in today. It's somewhat more necessary, somewhat less necessary, because you have access to this. You have access to YouTube. You have access to people like me who are trying to help you. You have access to Internet Archive. You can find plenty of research papers, scientific studies. You can find books on there. You can find so much on Internet Archive. You have access to ChatGPT, which is like having access to, it's like having access to every single PhD on the planet. You have access to PhD researchers in every single subject. Just ask it to pretend like it's a PhD student or a PhD graduate in any subject, and then get it to explain something to you, and then to whatever level that you can understand it. Explain it to somebody who's in the 10th grade or 4th grade or 2nd grade, whatever level you need. And you can use ChatGPT to teach yourself complex ideas. Now, again, just be cautious with ChatGPT. It sometimes lies, so you got to be careful with it. But you have access to so many tools today that there's really no excuse for you, becoming the next great polymath that we all remember as the greatest genius of our generation. So, like I said at the beginning of this video, it's not for everybody. It's a hard path. It's basically a life of nonstop studying, and you also have to be intellectually gifted. You also have to be truthful and honest. You can't be faking things. You can't be lying. You can't be cutting corners. The second you start doing that, you end up in pseudoscience realm, and then you've completely discredited yourself as an intellectual and as a scientist or a legitimate thinker. So just be cautious. But yeah, I think anybody can do this. Anybody can become the next genius. I truly believe that. I think somebody watching this video will benefit from these, and somebody watching this video will do something great. I'm absolutely sure of it. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope I shed some light on some things today, and I hope I inspired some people. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share with your friends. It helps boost this channel and the algorithm. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, it means the world to me. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.